And I'm going to start off with a question to the panel around the focus has very much been, at least in this last presentation, on achieving and avoiding pregnancy, particularly avoiding pregnancy. And that seems to be the larger historical context for kind of maybe the pushback on Humanae Vitae. But can we talk a little bit about the effectiveness as a method, particularly with regard to promoting health? And statistics and evidence around that, because I think that what we've talked about in the original presentations, in presenting the different methods, is that there's two sides to this. So, open to the panel.
From a research perspective, I don't know if that there's, other than definitely with the work of NAPRO technology, there has been some studies published with efficacy when these methods are used to help couples achieve, so as a means for helping those couples achieve health, meaning reproduction. It is effective. I don't know if there's anything has looked in a broader way, because I truly believe with Dr. Duane that this is a health literacy tool for women and for couples for their combined fertility, but especially for women in their cycling, and that we do need to do a lot more in that realm, or substantiate what many of us know from our practices over the last 10, 20, 30 years, incorporating these methods into our everyday use in women's healthcare, that it does work, that it's satisfying to women, it empowers them in terms of knowledge, but it also helps to correct or manage conditions in a way that makes medical sense. That's the way we approach other things in medicine in terms of getting at core causes and then treating those pathologies to normalize function, just like we do for diabetes or heart disease or hypertension.
I would say the short answer to your question is there has not been very much research at all about using these methods to address women's health issues. One of the projects that FACS is working on this year is we're producing a series of signature articles to look at the research of fertility awareness-based methods to address specific conditions. So we just finished our first one. We're in the process of finishing our first one on fertility awareness-based methods for PCOS. But there's really not a lot. I mean, Dr. Young has done a lot in terms of endometriosis. In March last year, FACS did a series of blog posts on the research related to FABMs for endometriosis. But this is another area of great need, where we need the funding and the support of the institutions, frankly. I mean, I'm a faculty member, quote unquote, at Georgetown, but I get zero support from that institution other than to be able to use their IRB to do the research that I'm trying to do. And I am very much a reluctant researcher. I mean, Joe may be a proud researcher. I don't like research. But the only reason I'm doing it is that, like, we absolutely need it. We need it to address, the range of women's health issues, not only from addressing reproductive health concerns, but just the basics of, like, monitoring the cycle. Like, if we start teaching adolescents, at 10, 12, 13, 14, will they have better health? I mean, Dr. Klaus has done research in Teen Star in terms of effectiveness for keeping adolescents from abstaining, but there's not been much in terms of, do adolescents who chart their cycle have less visits for, irregular cycles, because they've learned, like, oh, it's normal for my cycle to be irregular.
Well, first, I want to say kudos to Marguerite for recognizing the need and addressing it, even though you don't want to do research. I just want to add, it is a need. I have a sort of my own work in that. I have a PhD student right now working on looking at crate model data in relation to PCOS and endometriosis across several studies. So we're working on it. We need more people working on it.
I wanted to piggyback off of Dr. Duane. I attended a FEM medical training last summer. That's Fertility Education Medical Management out of New York. That's Anna Halpine's work with Dr. Pilar Vigil out of Chile. Now, they have a whole list of protocols to follow for diagnostics and what to do. It's kind of an algorithm to follow. And when I went through that medical training, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, but I went through the training and followed the algorithms and actually diagnosed someone with a pituitary tumor based on their whatever the algorithm, follow a flow chart, if you will. But it's based on the chart. If the chart comes back abnormal, what tests to do. Now, in saying that, I have to do the criticism for FEM is that there's not a lot of research to back up those protocols. But in that training, there's a very large book of what to do when a woman presents with an irregular, type chart. And I was very impressed by that. But the criticism is that there's not a lot of research to back it up. So yeah, more research.
Well, and I'm not a doctor, so I have nothing to say about this. But it was interesting just in terms of what we know or what we think we know. I suppose there are a lot of people out there who think they know basically what the pill does and doesn't do, and then we know that there are some negative health outcomes, and you can look at cancer rates and this and that. But just a month or two ago, there was an article that the BBC carried about studying the effects of, I think it was like the 9 different synthetic hormones used in various formulations of the pill, and how they really haven't begun to research some of the other and long-term effects that these things have. And one of them was, and only one woman has completed a preliminary study, that it literally changes brain wiring. And women begin to lose some of what we might associate with some of women's strengths, verbal ability to recognize faces and so on. And the comment in the BBC article was, why don't we know this? So there's a lot to learn, and obviously I think there's a lot to learn about what the good we can do.
Excellent. Questions from the audience? And we remind, if you've got a question, we need you to come up and speak into the microphone so that we can get you on the recording. Joe?
Hi everyone, Joe Zalon from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. This question is for the medical professionals on the board, and John, it's actually a consult that I asked you about last week. So I need some advice. Right? We do, 2,500, 3,000 consults a year, and we get this one every once in a while. And I got this one last week. It was an email from a priest who was doing spiritual direction from a man. He and his wife have been doing NFP, but they've had 7 children in 8 years. Their marriage is very, very strained, and this is what the priest is reporting to me, is that wife's cycles are irregular. There are other factors that, temperature and everything else. And so basically the question was, NFP is not working. Is there any way that they could use some sort of hormonal contraceptive? So after, fumbling with him and going back and forth, we actually had a really good conversation about it. But listening to you this morning, it's kind of a 3-part question. Sure. It's a 3-part question. With the presentations this morning, are the issues that this couple, or would you believe that the issues that this couple are having are really more educational than anything else? Secondly, are there, and this wasn't really discussed, I'd like to hear the panel's take on this, are there environmental, and I use the term very broadly, environmental or health factors that would render these FABMs not as useful as as maybe said? And lastly, when I get this consult again, or when I follow up with this priest after this conference, what should I tell him?
I'll take number 1. No. That is a great question. So the first question that I would want to know from this couple is, which method of NFP are they using? I do think it is an educational issue, and I mean, clearly if they have been trying to avoid, and they've had 7 children in 8 years, my thought would be, have they actually learned how to use a method effectively? And then, is the method that they're using the best method for them? And is there another method that may be better suited? And then finally, I think, we have to recognize that part of using a fertility awareness-based method effectively, part of living our life effectively as Christians, is it involves sacrifice. I mentioned that for my husband and I, after the birth of our second child, and I share this because, he shared this publicly, he was actually diagnosed with severe postpartum depression, to the point where he was like, if we have another child, I will have a mental breakdown. And I'm like, well, I don't really want that to happen to you, but I also was like, oh, we're going to use NFP. And, what we found at that point was using the Marquette method was helpful because of the data that it gave us. And we abstained. We never had sex until I could absolutely 100% confirm ovulation had occurred. So it required longer periods of abstinence, shorter opportunities. But because I love him that much and his mental health and overall health and well-being were so important, we were willing to do that. But it is a sacrifice, and I think we have to go back to who we are called to as Christians in terms of, there is that sacrifice involved. So, my advice back to the priest would be, where are they located? Find, instructors within their community. If there aren't instructors in the community, because oftentimes there's not, are there instructors online? With Marquette in particular, they've got really good online instruction, where they can email every day, and Richard Faring or Mary Schneider will respond back to them. They need to find a method that is a better fit for them, and it may involve real sacrifice in terms of the periods in which they need to abstain. And we need to recognize that it's hard, and we need to support them. I think oftentimes when I talk to people about using fertility awareness-based methods and where we are today, I'm like, it's where we were in the 50s with breastfeeding, right? Everybody was formula fed because it was easy, and what happened, what changed it, why breastfeeding is so widespread today, I truly believe it was the growth of La Leche League and these support groups, women that were there for one another, encouraging one another, recognizing the challenge of doing this and supporting one another. I mean, I really think we need NFP support groups, and I know that's something a Couple to Couple League is looking at doing. So I think, we can't always paint this as such an easy thing to do, and we have to recognize the challenge and provide the appropriate level of support. So
I agree with all that. I'd like to add, they should also see a physician or clinician who is well educated in supporting these methods, and the best way that if they can find somebody who's had that formal training, and that might mean driving somewhere or doing telemed or something. They may not have that in their area, but that is there's a lot that could. And so one of your questions: are there environmental factors that could make cycles difficult? I'll phrase it that way. And yes, absolutely. And but can they be managed medically? Yes. So, for example, often cooperative progesterone will help without suppressing ovulation, without being contraceptive, will make cycles more regular and easier to work with. So they need medical help likely, and from somebody who's trained and supportive.
The final part of it that's important is they continue to need that pastoral help to really live the grace of the sacrament of marriage, to help them through those places. My husband and I have welcomed a family of 10, and it does involve sacrifice and challenge and self-reflection about what marriage is and who you're called to. You're always called to the other, not called to you. And so whether it's your children or the couple, so they need that support. And I think from just a pastoral perspective and a community perspective, that corollary to La Leche League is something that's woefully missing. And unfortunately, the use of natural methods is uncommon among Catholic couples, which is equally sad. So they don't have the community support either. I'm sure that he has somebody at work who's like, just get fixed, man, it'll take it away. And that's not necessarily the best answer for their marriage either.
Dr. Blanking? Just broke the microphone. Sorry to the AV people. I'm Bill Blanky. I'm a family practice doc with St. Vincent, Evansville. I do OB in my practice, and one is a comment and one is a question. The comment is about the effectiveness rates. I'm not a researcher. Joe, I appreciate all you do and all that. I don't get statistics. I get all those wrong on standardized testing and all that, so I'm never going to get statistics. But I use the behavior perspective in my practice. I have a young couple, just got married. They were doing symptothermal. The wife lost the thermometer. They weren't really doing it. They have achieved much earlier than they expected when they came in. They were excited, but I make sure I point out the behavior to say, so really, you weren't using natural family planning to avoid, and it's almost like a preemptive strike and trying to say, don't go out and advertise that we're using natural family planning and we got pregnant. You were using your fertility and became pregnant. So I'm just trying to point out the behavior. So I appreciate the behavior perspective instead. And they're excited and they're fine, but I'm also trying to make sure that, the word doesn't get out in the street. Here's another, NFP failure. So I use that as a comment. So I appreciate the behavior idea. The second is a question, and maybe more for John, about Humana Vitae. I've given some talks locally, and I just want to understand the history of Humana Vitae a little bit more. My understanding is that St. Pope John Paul II was kind of like the ghostwriter, and Pope Paul VI had a version that he was going to publish, and then kind of revised it when John Paul got, like his document to him. So I don't know if that's true or not. And the second is more about what's going on now. My understanding is that Humana Vitae might be getting looked at again through the Vatican, and two perspectives, either to water it down, or is it more to make it more pastoral, because we know that the Catholics in the pews are not following it. So how can we teach it better, not water it down and water down the message, but how can we make it more applicable? How can we make it more appealing to people without changing the message, but trying to get people more interested? So what's your understanding of the background? What's your understanding of what the Vatican might be doing now?
Yes, and some of the paperwork behind Humanae Vitae, I think, has just been released in the last year or two. It appears that there was some sort of draft that Pope Paul VI had that I think might have been, well, it was different. I don't know how else to describe it. It's not how it came out. There was one other thing I mentioned. I think he really struggled with the issue. The pill, in a sense, I think initially sort of threw the church because it didn't look like some of the other contraceptive methods. It didn't look like a condom. It didn't look like the withdrawal method. It looked different. Didn't seem to interfere with organs, at least apparently. Or physically, and I do think it threw him a bit. And even when the pill was launched in the United States, and there's a fascinating history, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who wrote this. John Rock, I think a lot of people recognize that name, a Catholic physician, in some respects a practicing Catholic for many, many years, and I suppose trying to implement his faith, actually set up the pill with the cyclic period of infertility and allowing a bleed to make it look more natural. And in the United States, at least, up through 1965, it was illegal to sell contraceptives to married couples because of the Comstock laws. And so the pill was presented as a medication which regularized the cycle. So, I say all that, there were just a lot of factors going on that people were wondering, is this regulating the cycle? Is it different? Paul VI, even in a speech in 1977, spoke of a period, the church is in a period of reflection and discernment, which made it sound like, I don't know what I'm going to do, and yet subsequently, I think he told Father John Ford that there was no way he was going to change the teaching of Casti Connubiis. There were a lot of confusing things. Pope John Paul II, then Karl Wojtyła, though, had worked out much of the moral and intellectual framework behind the meanings of the marital act, and was in contact, really had been quite involved in the Second Vatican Council from a distance, and I think he had a huge influence on Pope Paul VI and on the message. So I do think that's true. Where things are going today, that's not clear, in a lot of respects between what is said and done and not said and done. It's utterly not clear. I mean, there were a series of talks given in Rome, starting, I think it was last fall, a series of lectures, some given at the Gregorian and other institutions by theologians who don't accept at least the full doctrine of Humanae Vitae. And you get into really profound questions about ecclesiology, wanting to help people, make things more pastoral, whatever that is. Can the church change its long, clear, specific, and authoritative teaching? There is such a thing as the development of dogma, but not a contradiction in dogma. That's exactly what Pope Paul VI was looking at. He was at pains to point out in Humanae Vitae, this isn't, it's not a teaching I'm making up. It's not a teaching the church has made up. Not even something, again, that was, in a sense, dictated in Scripture. This is in the very nature of reality, known through reason, known through, confirmed in a way through revelation, and it can't change. So I really can't predict what would come out of any attempt to somehow make this an easier pill to swallow, pardon the pun. But we'll see. But I do think it's on very solid ground.
Is this on?
Yep.
Just real quick, I'm Dave Stansfield, family practice in this region here in St. Louis. I have 3 wonderful symptothermal contraceptive failures, and now 3 grandsons also. But it had everything to do with wine, and I suspect that goes back to judgment and things like that. But it's also the miracle of Cana. Okay, so Christ's first miracle has something to do with that. My question has to do with teaching the adolescents, and I think it's a wonderful program. I'd like to get more of that in our community down in Hillsborough. We run into difficulty with school administrators. It just isn't happening in the schools. Even the Catholic schools isn't happening. Where do you do your programming and teaching?
I do all of my teaching online, so it's through the St. Augustine Foundation, and we don't ever charge for any of our courses. One of our mission, like one of the foundational missions, is that we want to offer it for free. We're not selling a curriculum. We just want the truth to be proclaimed. So everything that we do is online. A student will receive an email with the homework assignment. It's usually a video that they watch with an agenda, questions to be thinking about, because when we meet online live for that 1 hour that we talk, we will go over the agenda and the questions and have a conversation about what was on the videos. And so we break down the 13-week course into 2 weeks of topics. The first 2 weeks are fertility awareness based, or just fertility awareness, really. I did some videos online. You can find them all on our website. It's called sisterhoodcwa.com. That's sisterhoodcwa.com. And so for the first 2 weeks, it's all fertility awareness, and I teach the girls basic charting skills. And it's just, are you bleeding? Are you wet? Are you dry? And so I teach them about the pattern that we need to, for a healthy pattern, it's going to be bleed, wet, dry, wet, bleed. Or if she has a short cycle, it's bleed, wet, dry, bleed, wet, dry. So it's basically, are you bleeding? Are you feeling dry? Are you feeling wet? And so we're looking at that pattern, and eventually after 3 cycles, and that's why we did 13 weeks, so about 3 cycles, by the end, and we circle it back around throughout the 13 weeks, and we have an online chart review checklist that we go through, and by the end of the 13 weeks, we want our students to know the healthy length of the cycle, healthy cervical fluid, healthy patterns, right? The wet days, the dry days, how long a healthy luteal phase is, so that they can already know if they're in that healthy range. And that's more information than most women know about their cycles. And so we use an online charting system. We use a billings-based chart on nfpcharting.com. And so for those first 2 weeks, we really just talk about the biology. From weeks 3 on, we do everything else. We do the magisterium, the 6th commandment. We talk about pornography. We talk about abortion, sexually transmitted infections. We do a very systematic review of all contraceptives. A lot of times Catholic sex education programs get a bad reputation that we overstate the risks and understate the effectiveness. And so we didn't do that. It's a very honest, about this is what they do, this is how they work, this is how well they work, and this is the failure rate of the contraceptives. So it really is, I hate to use comprehensive sex education, that's one of those buzzwords, but it really is comprehensive. I mean, they come away with, from our course, with a really good understanding of sexual decision making, and all those hot button topics of the day.
Do you ever find that the adolescents like to do this as a group, or is that too weird? They prefer it one-on-one?
We hope to do that. I mean, our course could really be adapted to any situation. I mean, we could take what we do online one-to-one and put it in a group class. We could do it even online as a group where everybody logs in from the comfort of their own home. Right now, we're just doing it one-on-one, and that's done really well. There is an element of, not wanting to share so deeply when there's a group, so I know that would be a challenge that we'd have to overcome if we did a group setting. But the really beautiful thing about doing something in person is that you can gel as a group, right? And then it becomes like we're doing this together, we're in this together in the trenches, and so there's a beautiful way to gel sort of as a group of young girls. But that trust element really, really has to be there with the teacher. And so the teacher really has to establish rapport with her students, and Dr. Hannah Klaus, Sister Hannah, will talk about that a lot with her Teen Star program, is that rapport that is built between student and teacher. So,
I have a question that may contribute to the first question too. So I feel like I received this information in a newsletter that Dr. Hilgers and some of the folks at the Pope Paul VI Institute were either about to publish or have recently published a study on checking a serum post-ovulatory progesterone level, because with the idea being that if progesterone is above a certain level, you can confirm ovulation has occurred, so therefore you can pretty much reassure yourself that you're not going to get pregnant during that time. What are the ethics around checking something like that for such certainty, and would that possibly be helpful in this gentleman's circumstance that he presented?
That study was presented last summer. I don't know where it is in terms of publication. Dr. Hilger presented at the Academy meeting, Academy of Fertility Care Professionals. Would that help this couple? Yeah, like possibly, depending on the situation. It could be helpful. And what was the other question? Oh, I don't see, I'm not an ethicist. I don't see any ethical problem with the idea of another indicator of your fertility. It's like temperature or something else that tells you you've ovulated. It's just another indicator.
Back to the Humanae Vitae, I'm Leanne Gilley, nurse practitioner from Texas, and we've combined the Humanae Vitae, dovetailed perfectly with theology of the body from St. John Paul the second, or is that right? Yeah. Anyway, and then we've also combined that with teaching the teenagers in high school the theology of the body and the Humanae Vitae. And I mean, when you read them together, it looks like the Holy Spirit, of course, knew what they were doing, inspiring the popes, because they dovetail so well together. And I don't hear much talk about theology of the body anymore, but to me, well, I do in Texas, but not here, so not so far. So I feel like that's one thing that really has moved on Humanae Vitae with theology of the body. But I also notice we talk a lot about teaching the girls, which I understand it's their body, and we are the ones ovulating and that. But at that time too, and in my experience, boys need to be taught. We do not have good, strong men in the United States today. We don't have good fathers. We don't have godly men. I'm not speaking about all the men here, but but overall, generally, we would all have to agree that we don't in our society and even in our churches. And I saw this 10 years ago when I was at Creighton and becoming dual credited, and how frustrated I was, because where are the men? Where are we teaching the guys? Where are we letting them know what godly men are? and helping them to understand theology of the body and humani vitae and sacrifice. And let's be honest, no, you can't have intercourse tonight because I might be ovulating and we can't have babies today. You know, I mean, let's just be honest, and we put all foo-foo language on it, but that's the truth. Men need to hear that and understand what that sacrifice means. And a lot of men don't. So we really need to concentrate on teaching our boys and teaching our men.
I think we would probably all agree with that statement. And I will say the Teen Star program does have a curriculum specifically for boys, but the goal is to have men teaching boys. It doesn't really help for, adult women to talk to boys about their testosterone and their erections, and it just kind of freaks them all out. So Dr. Klaus did develop a curriculum specifically for boys. And when I was the medical director at the Catholic Charity Centers in Washington, D.C., I recruited and hired a fellow family physician who's a Creighton medical consultant who became trained as a Teen Star educator, and he ran a weekly group. It was actually every other week for the boys, to teach them. And it is so important. I mean, I have a 12-year-old son now, and just like explaining to him like the effects of the testosterone on his emotions, and I think it is important. But I think you're right. It's an area where there's great need. I would speak to all the godly men in this room, like consider whether or not you yourself would consider being trained to teach young boys, because we need good role models for them.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, there's a lot of truth in what you say, and you think, again, I don't know why I like history so much, but you think of some of the roots of these problems. Second wave feminism is something that began in the post-World War II period. One of its biggest proponents was Simone de Beauvoir, and she said that essentially her prescription was that women had to become freed of their sexuality, in order to be free. She practically taught, and I can't remember the quotes off the top of my head, essentially women were enslaved by their very biology and by their very nature. She went on to say that you couldn't give women the choice to stay home and have children because too many women would take it. So much of feminism, and I think would say, feminism's it's looking a little old. We have some more recent challenging movements and victim groups in our society, but a big part of that second wave feminism was essentially involved saying it doesn't matter whether you're a man and a woman to get a job. The side effect was to say, in the end, what does it mean to be a fulfilled man and a fulfilled woman? A good man, a virtuous man. The word virtue means a man who's complete, in a sense, who's a real man. I mean, that's what the virtues were all about. And so that's pretty deep. It's a big part of the modern era. Some of this has been informed by technology. Some of it's been informed by politics. Think of in America, the emphasis on the individual, and there's a great amount of good to that. But it's created a culture of autonomy, which is highly destructive. Quick word on Pope John Paul II and the theology of the body, because he founded the Pope John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family. The goal was to reframe the way that people understood and could live out the teachings of the church. Who are we? Where are we from? Where are we going? And what does it mean to be happy, fulfilled as a man or a woman in relationship? Well, we get all kinds of messages about that, whether it's commercials, movies, entertainment, advocacy, you name it. And so the theology of the body was really a meditation on Scripture, on revelation, on the moral teaching of the church, on the order of reality, to say, that our identity is something very deep, and it's fulfilled in self-gift. So it does complete Humanae Vitae, and I do think that as a Catholic community, we have to be able to teach a true, at least a deeper truth about human identity as male and female, as husband and wife, father and mother. So there's a lot of work to do.
One last question.
Hi there, Michael Dixon here in St. Louis.
I want to commend all of you. I have a large group of patients who don't want to use natural family planning, in that I'm humbled that they are open to life.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I have a large group of patients who do not want to use natural family planning because they are open to life. And I see that much of what we are doing here is responding to the call of paragraphs 24 and 27 for those who do have serious and grave reasons. I've made a living treating patients in this scenario. But my question for you, Dr. Berhaney, is what did Pope Paul VI view as the fundamental mission of Humanae Vitae? Clearly, it seems like it is, as I interpret it, a support of couples to be open to life. And the very small subset is those who do have serious and grave reason, for which we are here today to support that group. And it seems that we focus so much on using natural family planning, all of the fertility-based methods as methods of birth control, as methods of avoiding, when my take on Humanae Vitae is that we are called to be open to life. And there's a subtle distinction there, but I don't know if you could elaborate on what his real focus was. Was it basically to allow us to be open to life, or an anti-birth control philosophy at that time? And I can certainly see both.
Well, that's a very good question. I'll try to do justice in a short period. He was responding to a very specific question, I think. And I tried to mention that in the talk, and trying to resolve, obviously, the church's rejection of any kind of contraceptive measure of behavior was centuries old, but again, the pill had raised new questions. He mentioned a few things that were new. So one of, again, fear of overpopulation, challenges in modern society, and so on. I think we almost take for granted that the very knowledge, the very ability to understand periods of fertility and infertility, which Pope Pius XI referenced very briefly in Casti Connubii, was only really published scientifically in 1930. Had to be published in 30 because Casti Connubii came out December, I think, 31st of 1930. So Pope Paul VI was speaking to resolve a very specific question, although it obviously had much deeper roots. The teaching on childbearing, on openness to life, on responsible parenthood is much larger, much greater. There's a very beautiful expression of that teaching in the documents of the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, paragraphs 48 through 52, that again describe marriage and the call to parenthood in very beautiful terms, and also state that parents need to be able to determine the size of their families. They must do this with prudence. They must do this with generosity. Is it the case, I suppose, in the modern world that can you divide the world so neatly into a subset of people who have just causes for limitation, and a larger set of people, even if it's 40 to 60%, who, as a general rule, should be open to new life whenever it comes? Well, Pope Paul VI didn't speak to that with the same level of specificity, and I don't think that is as clear or definable. So anyway, it is complex. He was speaking to something very specific, the good of prudence, the good and the need to be generous and to welcome life and to raise it up, all profound goods. And after that, I think it's the practice of the virtues in finding the right balance for a couple. I remember Dr. Paul Vitz, convert to Catholicism, psychiatrist, taught us in DC in the 90s. He said, in New York City, 4 children is a big family, right? In New York City. And some people are out in Nebraska, so there are going to be some differences.
I want to say thank you very much for that question and for stating something that I think often goes unstated. I think it's important to recognize, and I think, we fall into this trap because we're responding to the culture that we live in. I want to share two very brief patient examples. I had a patient give birth to her 5th child in July. Her oldest twins are 5. And I said to her, feel free at any point if you want to talk to me about, she was planning breastfeeding, but I said, if you want to talk to me about like the return of your fertility and monitoring your signs, and she just sort of looked at me like, why would I do that? And I caught myself. I'm like, wow, even though like I was clearly very open and supportive of her use of fertility, like she was like, why would I even want to think about monitoring my fertility like that? And I thought to myself, that's so true. And tying into the effectiveness, we have all of these couples Catholic couples that use quote unquote natural family planning. They're not. They are simply open to life, but yet we're saying, oh, these methods are clearly not effective because they have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 children. And then another patient story, I have a patient who had 5 children in about 6 years, and in the last year, she's experienced 2 miscarriages. And these have both been devastating for her, and she said to me, she's like, I just feel so blessed that you're not looking at it as a good thing and that you're willing to work with me to help me figure this out so the next time I get pregnant, I can hopefully carry that pregnancy. And I'm happy to say, like, she had an 8-week ultrasound last week with fetal heart tones, and she's on progesterone supplementation. And, it was so encouraging to her to have a doctor that wouldn't look at her and say, well, you already have 5 children, you're 36. But we can so easily get caught up in that world. And trust me, I live in that world, and that's the world I tend to operate in most of the time because I feel like we've got to be out there. But it's so encouraging and just humbling and enriching to be among all of you, to be like, oh, literally this gives me the energy to keep going out and fighting in that world. But thank you very much for stating that, because I think we do have to recognize that life is a gift.
Clearly, we live, our own profession is contraceptive, the way and so we're defending ourselves sometimes, and in reality, we just have to be open to the patients who are so generous.
Yeah.
I would like to add, I'd honor those patients as well, but I would also say, and I don't know how this roots in Humana Vitae per se, that in my opinion, almost every woman would benefit from understanding her cycle and being able to, and maybe there's some women that don't want to, and maybe that's fine, but then when they run into problems getting pregnant or having miscarriages or whatever, or if they're single and they're not sexually active, I think my personal opinion is all women would benefit from having a basic understanding of tracking their cycle.
In brief summary, you're not required to use fertility awareness by the church, though the church deems it licit, and there might be other benefits. So, did that faithfully summarize it? All right, excellent.